She demanded half my pension, and I thought my daughter was just struggling. But the secrets my daughter was hiding will shock you. My name is Lisa. This is my sympathetic story. It was one of those crisp October evenings in Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of evening where the air had a hint of coolness, and the golden sunlight began to fade into the horizon, casting a gentle glow across my little two-story home. After years of working at the bank, I finally retired. I had spent most of my life helping others, and now it was my time to relax. At least, that's what I thought. It was just past 6 p.m. when Sarah, my 34-year-old daughter, walked into the kitchen. She had been living with me for the past 18 months, after going through a tough breakup and losing her job in the corporate world. At first, I was happy to have her home, but lately, there had been an unsettling tension between us. I chalked it up to stress, knowing how hard it must have been for her to pick up the pieces of her life. "Mom, we need to talk," Sarah said, sitting down at the kitchen table. I turned from the stove, stirring the pot roast I had prepared for dinner, trying to hide my nervousness. Something about her tone didn't sit right with me. I hadn't seen her this serious in months. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my heart had already begun to race. She paused, looking at her hands for a moment before meeting my gaze. "I need money, Mom. A lot of money." My breath hitched. This wasn't the kind of conversation I had expected. She had been living here rent-free for over a year, and I had been more than generous. I'd taken care of her, fed her, and offered emotional support through her struggles. But this was different. "Money?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "Sarah, you know I'm on a fixed income now. My pension is all I have left." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I know, Mom. I've thought it through, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and sat down across from her. "What's this about, Sarah? You've never asked me for money before." Her face hardened, and she leaned in closer. "I need half of your pension, Mom. It's an investment, a business opportunity." My mind raced as I tried to process what she was saying. Half of my pension? That was my entire savings, my financial security in my retirement years. I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest. "Are you serious?" I managed to say, my voice cracking. "I can't just give you that kind of money, Sarah. I've worked my whole life for that." She leaned back in her chair, a look of frustration clouding her face. "You don't understand, Mom. I'm trying to turn my life around. This opportunity, this is the chance I've been waiting for. Without your help, it's never going to happen." I stared at her, trying to understand the urgency in her voice. But as much as I wanted to help, something about the situation didn't feel right. Sarah wasn't a businesswoman. She wasn't the type to take risks. I'd seen her struggle with her finances in the past, but this request seemed so out of the blue. "I can't give you half of my pension," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to find another way." Her eyes narrowed. "You always say that, Mom. You always tell me to do things on my own. But when it's time to actually help, you shut me down. I can't do this without you." The room felt like it was closing in on me. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but I couldn't find the words to ask. Why was she asking for so much? Why now, after all this time? "I don't know what to say, Sarah. This isn't like you," I said, my voice breaking. She stood up suddenly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You never helped me when I needed it. This is the last chance I have, and you're turning me down." I stood up as well, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. "I've given you everything I can, Sarah. You've been living here rent-free, eating my food, and now you want me to give you half of my future. I'm sorry, I can't." Her expression changed. The anger faded, replaced with something darker. "You'll regret this, Mom," she spat. You'll see just how much you've failed me." With that, she turned and stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, trembling. I stared at the empty chair where she had been sitting moments ago, my heart pounding in my chest. The words echoed in my mind. "You'll regret this." I had never seen my daughter so angry, so desperate. It terrified me. I couldn't understand why she would do this to me. Had I failed her as a mother, or was there something deeper going on? I needed answers. I needed to understand why Sarah was asking for so much and what had driven her to this point. But first, I had to figure out how to protect myself. The storm had only just begun, and I could feel it coming. What would happen next? Was this truly the end of our relationship, or was there something even darker lurking beneath the surface? Pause for a moment and think about it. What would you do in Lisa's shoes? If you were in her position, how would you handle such a sudden and unexpected request from your own child? Drop a comment below and let me know what you would do. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for the next episode, where Lisa takes a closer look at Sarah's mysterious request. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The twists are just beginning. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house like a final, painful note in a song I didn't want to hear. Sarah had stormed out, leaving me standing there in the kitchen, alone, confused, and afraid. What had just happened? This wasn't like her. She was always so composed, so careful with her words. But tonight she was a stranger. I sat back down at the table, trying to catch my breath, my hands trembling. My mind kept replaying her words. "You'll regret this." There was something in her tone, a venom that I had never heard before. What had changed? Was this really about money? Or was there something deeper, something darker lurking beneath the surface? I had to know. I couldn't let this go, not like this. My instincts, those old motherly instincts, screamed at me to understand. Why would she ask for half of my pension? What had driven her to this point of desperation? I had spent years working to secure my future, and now my daughter was asking me to hand it all over. I had to get to the bottom of this. After a restless night filled with tossing and turning, I decided I wasn't going to sit in the dark any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed my phone and started going through her recent messages. The texts were nothing out of the ordinary, just casual chit-chat about the things we'd been talking about, the plans we'd made. But something caught my eye, an email she had left open on her laptop the day before. It was from a financial advisor, and the subject line was business opportunity, investment proposal. My stomach dropped. Investment? I clicked the email and scanned through it quickly. The message was filled with high-level jargon about a new business venture she was considering, with a request for a substantial sum of money to secure her place in this opportunity. The email wasn't even written by Sarah. It was from someone named Kyle, a name I had never heard before. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I had a sinking feeling in my gut. This didn't feel right. I dialed Sarah's phone, my heart pounding in my chest. The phone rang for what seemed like an eternity before it went to voicemail. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaky. "We need to talk. Please call me back." I hung up and sat back, my thoughts racing. Who was Kyle? Why did Sarah mention him? And why was she involved in something that sounded so risky? I had to confront her. No more secrets. Later that evening, Sarah returned. I had been packing the house, nerves on edge, wondering if this would be the night that everything would explode. When she walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. "Sarah," I began, my voice firm, "we need to talk. About the money, about everything." She froze for a second, a flicker of panic flashing in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a casual smile. "Mom, I told you already. It's not that big of a deal. I just need a little help, that's all." "Help," I shot back, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "I found the email, Sarah, the one from Kyle. What is this about? What's really going on?" Her face went pale, and for a moment I thought she might break down. But then she regained her composure, shaking her head slowly. "Mom, it's not what you think. I didn't want you to know about this. It's a business opportunity. It's a chance to make some real money. Kyle's been helping me with it, and we're going to turn things around." My mind was racing. "Kyle, who is he? Why didn't you tell me about him before? And why is he involved with your finances?" She stepped back, crossing her arms defensively. "Kyle is just a guy I met through a friend. He's been helping me figure out this investment opportunity. It's a business, Mom. You wouldn't understand." I stood up, my chair scraping across the floor with a loud screech. "A business? You're asking me for half of my pension for some business that you're not even willing to explain. You expect me to just trust you, Sarah." She looked down, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Mom. I just thought you would understand. I need to make something of myself. I can't keep living like this. You don't know what it's like." Her words cut through me like a knife. I saw the pain in her eyes, but I also saw something else, a sense of entitlement, a desire to take what wasn't hers. She had lived with me rent-free for over a year. I had helped her when she needed it most. And now she was asking me to give up my hard-earned savings. "Sarah, this isn't you. This isn't the person I raised. What happened to you?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. She shook her head, her face contorting in frustration. "You don't get it, do you? I've worked so hard and I've lost everything. You've always had your security, your pension, your house. But I've had nothing, Mom. Nothing. I'm tired of struggling. I need this chance." Her words echoed in my head as I stood there, speechless. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her need for validation, for something she felt she had never received from me. She was drowning, and instead of reaching for a life raft, she was trying to pull me down with her. "I can't do it, Sarah," I whispered, the words heavy on my tongue. "I can't give you half of my pension, not for this." She stood there, trembling with rage. "You don't trust me, Mom. You never have. I've been asking for your help for years, and every time you turn me away. I'm done. I'll figure it out myself." She turned and walked toward the door, but before she left, she paused, her back to me. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." And with that, she was gone. What would you do in Lisa's shoes? Can a mother ever be too protective of her child? Do you think Sarah is really just struggling, or is there more to this story than meets the eye? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Believe me, you'll want to see what happens next. The truth is about to be revealed, and it's going to leave you speechless. The house felt emptier than ever after Sarah left. The silence was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I stood there in the living room, staring at the door she had slammed shut, my hands shaking. Was she right? Had I failed her? I had spent my whole life giving everything I had to my children. I sacrificed so much. I worked long hours, barely had time for myself, just to ensure they had what they needed. But now, in her eyes, it felt like it was never enough. Was my refusal to give her what she asked for a betrayal? Or was I simply protecting myself from being drained dry by a daughter who saw me as nothing more than a source of money? I couldn't sleep that night. Thoughts of Sarah's anger haunted me, and her words kept replaying in my mind. "You'll regret this." It wasn't just the demand for my pension that shocked me, it was the fury behind it, the way she'd lashed out. My heart ached for her, but there was something inside me telling me to hold firm. I had worked too hard for what little I had left. I couldn't let her destroy it. I needed to figure out what was really going on, but I had no idea where to start. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of urgency that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had to find out the truth about Sarah's situation, about this mysterious Kyle who seemed to be pulling the strings in her life. I couldn't let her manipulate me any longer. I grabbed my purse and decided to go out for the day. I needed to clear my mind, but I also needed answers. I had never been one to play detective, but I had to dig deeper. Something was off, and I was determined to uncover it. I drove to the local coffee shop, a cozy little place I often visited when I needed to think. I ordered my usual, a simple black coffee, and sat by the window, watching the world go by. The warmth of the cup in my hands was a small comfort, but it couldn't erase the gnawing feeling in my gut. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from my friend, Carol. "Lisa, I've been thinking about you all morning. I know this has been hard with Sarah. I can't even imagine how hurt you must feel right now. I wanted to ask, have you spoken to her ex yet? I'm hearing some things that don't add up." Carol's message hit me like a lightning bolt. Her ex. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but she was right. He might know something. He had always been involved in Sarah's life, even when they were together. After they broke up, he still tried to stay in touch with her, though it never seemed to go anywhere. But now, maybe he was the key to unlocking this mystery. I didn't waste a second. I called him. "Hello." His voice on the other end of the line sounded hesitant. "Mark," I asked, my voice tight. "It's Lisa. I need to talk to you. It's about Sarah." There was a long pause before he answered. "Sarah, what's going on?" I explained everything: the demand for half my pension, the mysterious business opportunity, and the email from Kyle. I could hear the shock in his voice when I mentioned Kyle's name. "You're telling me Sarah's involved in a business with him?" Mark asked, his voice filled with disbelief. That's not good, Lisa. I don't know if you know this, but Sarah's been in some bad situations before. I've tried to help her, but she doesn't listen. And Kyle, he's no good. I think Sarah's getting herself deeper and deeper into something she can't get out of." My heart sank. I knew Sarah had struggled in the past, but I didn't realize the extent of it. Was she so desperate that she was willing to gamble everything, her relationship with me, her future, on a dangerous business deal? The thought made my blood run cold. Mark continued, "Lisa, I think Sarah's hiding something. She's been borrowing money from people. I don't know how deep this goes, but I'm worried. If you don't step in, things could get worse." I sat there, stunned by his words. Borrowing money from people? What had happened to my daughter? Where had I gone wrong? I had always been there for her, always tried to protect her. Yet somehow I had missed this. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus. "Do you know anything else about Kyle? Who is he, really? What's his connection to Sarah?" There was a long silence before Mark answered. "Kyle's just a guy she met through a friend, but from what I've heard, he's involved in some shady stuff. Not a good influence on her, not at all." That was the final straw. I knew then that I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act. I had to confront Sarah, no matter the cost. But how? How could I make her see what she was doing to herself? As I drove home, the weight of the situation felt unbearable. I knew I had to protect my future, but I also didn't want to lose my daughter. She was my only child, and I had always dreamed of us growing old together, watching her thrive and succeed. But now, it seemed like everything was falling apart. When I walked through the door, I found Sarah sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. Her eyes flickered up when she saw me, but she didn't say anything. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with tension that had been building for months. "Sarah," I began, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "We need to talk. I'm not going to let this go any longer." She rolled her eyes, clearly frustrated. "What now, Mom? Haven't we already talked enough?" "No," I replied firmly. "We haven't. I know about Kyle, and I know about your debt. You've been hiding this from me. Why?" For the first time, she didn't snap back. Instead, she looked away, her face pale and her lips trembled. "I didn't want you to know, Mom. I didn't want to disappoint you." "You didn't want to disappoint me?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, you've already disappointed me by lying to me, by hiding the truth. I've been here for you every step of the way, and now you're asking me to give up everything I have left for a business that doesn't even make sense." She shook her head, tears starting to fall. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I could make it work, everything would be okay. I thought I could fix everything." I walked over to her, kneeling down in front of her. "Sarah, you don't have to fix everything alone, but you can't keep hiding from the truth. You can't keep running from your problems." For the first time in months, she reached out and took my hand. Her tears soaked through my shirt, but I didn't mind. We were finally connecting again. "I don't know what to do, Mom," she whispered. "I'll help you," I said softly. "But first, we need to get out of this mess. We need to stop Kyle, and we need to start rebuilding your life. But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" she asked, looking up at me through her tears. "That you'll never keep secrets from me again. That we'll face this together." She nodded, her face a mixture of relief and regret. "I promise, Mom, I promise." But as I held her, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the storm was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. The next few days felt like a blur. As Sarah and I tried to rebuild the fragile trust we had left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Her tears were real, and I knew she regretted what she had done, but there was more to this story, something deeper that she wasn't telling me. I could see it in the way she avoided my gaze, in the way her hands fidgeted when we spoke, as though she was hiding a part of herself from me. I knew it wasn't just about the money, but I didn't know how to break through that wall she had built around herself. What had changed in my daughter? What happened to the girl who had once come to me with every little worry, every small triumph? Now, it felt like she was a stranger, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending that everything was going to be okay. The turning point came 3 days after our conversation, when Sarah came to me with a strange request. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to come with me to meet Kyle. I think he's been honest with me, but I need you to see for yourself. You need to know what's really going on." Her eyes were wide with desperation, and for the first time, I saw fear in her face. Fear of what, though? Fear of me finding out the truth? Fear of Kyle's manipulation? Or was there something even darker that she hadn't let slip? I didn't know what to think. My instincts screamed at me to say no, to keep her away from whatever was going on with Kyle. But the part of me that still wanted to believe in Sarah, that wanted to trust her, told me that maybe, just maybe, this could be a turning point. "Okay," I said, surprising myself. "But this is the last chance, Sarah. After this, I'm done with secrets. I need to see it all. I need to know the truth." She nodded quickly, as though she had been waiting for me to agree, and in that moment, something in her seemed to relax. She wasn't fighting anymore. We drove in silence to a small office building on the edge of Charlotte, a place I had never seen before. The streets around it were quiet, almost too quiet, and my stomach twisted in knots. Why had Kyle chosen this place? It felt like something out of a movie, the kind of place where deals were made in the shadows, away from prying eyes. When we stepped inside, I was hit by the smell of stale coffee and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. The building looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. It had that run-down, seedy charm that made you question the kind of business that took place there. A man in his late 30s sat behind a desk in the lobby. His suit was a little too tight, and his hair was combed over in a way that seemed to try a little too hard. He looked up as we entered, his eyes darting to Sarah before landing on me. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something that didn't sit right with me. "It's good to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't trust him. There was something about his demeanor that screamed slick salesman, and I didn't like it one bit. "Where's Kyle?" I asked bluntly, my eyes narrowing as I sized him up. "Right this way," he replied, standing up and gesturing for us to follow. We walked down a narrow hallway, and I felt my heart beat faster with each step. When we reached the last door, he knocked before opening it, revealing a small, dimly lit office. A man in his 40s sat behind a desk, the lines on his face deep, his eyes sharp but cold. He was the kind of man who looked like he knew exactly how to get what he wanted, and I didn't like him one bit. "Mrs. Reynolds," Kyle said, standing up to shake my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm glad you could make it." His handshake was firm, too firm, and I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes flickered to Sarah, almost as if checking to see if she was watching. I glanced at Sarah, and for the first time I saw it, the nervousness in her eyes. She was uncomfortable. But why? Hadn't she been the one asking me to come here in the first place? I forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation civil. "So, Kyle," I began, "Sarah tells me you've got some investment opportunities for her. But I'm not just going to sit here and pretend that everything's okay. I need to know what's really going on. Why did Sarah ask for half of my pension? What's the real story?" Kyle didn't flinch. He simply leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he studied me. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Reynolds. You're a mother who only wants the best for her daughter. I respect that. But what Sarah and I are doing is strictly business. It's a legitimate opportunity that's going to change her life. All she needs is your trust, and of course, your financial backing." Something about his words didn't sit right with me. Legitimate? His whole demeanor screamed illegitimate. I glanced at Sarah, and this time I could see it, the guilt. It was all over her face. "What's going on, Sarah?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "Why did you bring me here? What are you really involved in?" Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She closed it again, her hands shaking at her sides. Kyle noticed and quickly jumped in. "Sarah is simply worried about how you'll react," Kyle said, his voice laced with a false sweetness. "She's in a little bit of debt, but this investment will clear it all up. It's the only way for her to get back on her feet. She just needs a little push from someone she can trust." That was when it hit me. Debt. Sarah had been hiding something, and now the truth was coming to light. Kyle wasn't the helpful business partner he claimed to be. He was using Sarah, using her vulnerabilities, to manipulate her into giving him more control over her finances. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping across the floor. "I don't trust you, Kyle, and I don't trust this business opportunity. You're using my daughter, and I won't stand for it." Kyle's smile faltered for just a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "You don't have to trust me, Mrs. Reynolds, but Sarah needs this, and if you don't help her, I'll make sure she's left with nothing." That was it. That was the moment I realized I had been right all along. Kyle wasn't just asking for money. He was trying to control Sarah, and he was using her desperation as a weapon. I felt a surge of fury rise in my chest. This was no longer just about money. This was about saving my daughter from herself. I turned to Sarah, my voice shaking with emotion. "I'm done with this, Sarah. You're coming home with me, and we're going to get you the help you need, without Kyle and without any more lies." Sarah looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please," I didn't know what to do. But I was already done. I couldn't let her drown in this mess any longer. It was time to fight for her, to save her from the web she had tangled herself in. As we walked out of the office, I could feel the weight of everything I had just discovered. Kyle's face remained in my mind as I drove Sarah home. I knew it wasn't over. There was still so much more to uncover, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially Kyle, tear my daughter apart. The days after our meeting with Kyle felt like an emotional roller coaster. Sarah had come home with me, and for a while, things seemed like they might be okay again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still terribly wrong. Despite Sarah's promises to be honest with me, there was a heaviness in her eyes, a sense of guilt that weighed down on both of us. I tried to talk to her, to get her to open up about everything, but she clammed up every time I brought up the topic of Kyle or the business deal. I couldn't keep doing this alone. I couldn't carry the burden of trying to protect my daughter without anyone else knowing what was going on. I needed help, so I called a family meeting. I hadn't spoken to my ex-husband, Mark, in years. We hadn't had a cordial relationship since our divorce, but after everything that had happened with Sarah, I knew I needed him. Mark had always been a hands-on dad, but in recent years, we had become strangers. Still, I couldn't deny the fact that Sarah needed us both now more than ever. I also called Jake, my son. He had always been the sensible one, the one who kept his head when the rest of us were falling apart. If there was anyone who could offer a different perspective on this, it was Jake. But even he had been distant lately, caught up in his own life and career. I didn't know if he'd be willing to come, but I had to try. The evening of the meeting, my heart was racing as I set the table. I hadn't had my family under the same roof in a long time, and it was strange, to say the least. Sarah was sitting on the couch. Her arms crossed, her face a mixture of frustration and fear. She was avoiding eye contact, and I could see the walls she'd built around herself getting taller by the minute. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. Jake was the first to arrive, looking as sharp as always in his business suit. He hugged me quickly and then sat down at the table, his brow furrowed in concern. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of worry. "What's going on? You sounded pretty serious on the phone." I could tell he wasn't just here for the dinner. He knew something was wrong, and he had that look in his eyes, the one that meant he was ready to help, but only if I was ready to tell him everything. Just as I was about to speak, the door opened again and Mark walked in, his tall frame filling the doorway. It had been years since I had seen him, and I couldn't help but notice how much older he looked. His hair was graying at the temples, and his usual confident stride had slowed somewhat. But there was still that familiar spark in his eyes. He was here, and that was what mattered. "Lisa," he said, offering a tense smile, "you sounded like this couldn't wait. What's going on?" I glanced at Sarah, who was staring down at her hands, avoiding all of our gazes. It was time. I had to come clean for all our sakes. I took a deep breath and began, my voice wavering with emotion. I'm not sure where to start, but Sarah, she's been hiding something from all of us. She's gotten herself tangled up in something dangerous, and I don't know how deep it goes. Sarah looked up at me, her face pale. Mom, please, she whispered. Don't do this. Don't drag them into this. But I couldn't stop. I had already crossed the line, and there was no turning back. She's been involved with Kyle, this man she met through some business deal. She asked me for half of my pension, Sarah. My voice cracked as I said it. She didn't tell me the whole truth. She's been borrowing money, and I'm afraid she's in way over her head. There was a tense silence in the room. Jake's eyes widened, and he leaned forward. Sarah, what is going on? Why didn't you tell us this before? But Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the street below. I could see her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She was falling apart, and I didn't know how to reach her anymore. Mark cleared his throat. We need to do something about this. Sarah, you can't keep hiding this from us. You can't keep making these choices on your own. I watched Sarah as she slowly turned around, her face pale and tear-streaked. You don't get it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I've tried, okay? I've tried to fix everything. I didn't want you all to know. I didn't want to disappoint you, but I'm so far in. I don't know how to get out. Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. Disappoint me. Those words cut deeper than anything else. I had always tried to protect her, to give her everything I could, and now she felt like she had let me down. Sarah, I said softly, walking over to her. You can't do this alone. We're your family. We've always been here for you, but you have to stop running, you have to stop hiding. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how, Mom. I've made so many mistakes. I've messed everything up. I didn't want to be like you, I didn't want to depend on you forever. But now I need you more than ever, and I don't know what to do. The guilt in her voice broke me. I had spent so many years trying to protect her from the world, but I had never prepared her for this. This feeling of being overwhelmed, of feeling like the walls were closing in. I had always been the one who took care of everything. But now, I realized, I hadn't prepared her to face life's challenges on her own. Sarah, you're not a failure, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You've made mistakes, but that doesn't make you a failure. We all make mistakes. But you need to trust us now. You need to trust that we'll help you. The room was heavy with silence. Jake finally spoke up, his voice firm. Sarah, we can't help you if you keep shutting us out. You need to be honest with us, all of us. No more secrets. We're here for you, but we can't do this if you're still hiding things. I saw something shift in Sarah's eyes, a flicker of understanding. Slowly, she nodded, wiping the tears from her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant for it to go this far. Good, Mark said, standing up. Now let's figure out how we can help you get out of this mess. We're not going to let you drown in it, okay? For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We were starting to heal. Slowly but surely, we were starting to rebuild what had been broken. What would you do if you found out your child had been hiding something this serious? Would you be able to trust them again? Or would it be too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next episode is going to be full of unexpected twists. You won't want to miss what happens next. The weight of everything we had just uncovered hit me like a tidal wave. For days after our family meeting, Sarah and I tried to find our way back to a semblance of normalcy, but the truth was, I didn't know if we'd ever get there. The cracks in our relationship were too deep, the damage too far-reaching. She had been hiding things from me for so long, things I never could have imagined. I kept replaying everything in my mind. Sarah had been borrowing money, hiding her debts, getting involved with Kyle, and for what? A quick fix. A get-rich-quick scheme that never stood a chance of working. It felt like a cruel joke. But the hardest part, the part I couldn't shake, Sarah had been so scared of disappointing me that she'd buried herself in lies, and now she was tangled in a mess that might take us both down with her. But there was something else I hadn't told anyone, not even Sarah. Something that had been gnawing at me, making my skin crawl. I had a gut feeling that there was more to Kyle than he was letting on. The way he had smiled at me that day, so confident, so assured, like he knew something I didn't. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about him screamed danger. I spent the next few days combing through every piece of information I could find. I looked up everything I could about Kyle, his name, any businesses he might have been involved with, even checking social media profiles and background checks. I dug deeper than I ever thought I would, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something vital. It was on the 4th day of this search that I finally stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. Sarah had been keeping more than just financial secrets from me. I found an old text message buried deep in her phone, one she had tried to delete, but somehow it had still been there. The message was from Kyle, and it sent chills down my spine. "I'm not sure how much longer we can keep this up. We need to get her money before she figures it out. She's too trusting. We've got to make it look like a mistake. She won't know what hit her." I stared at the message, my hands shaking, my heart racing. What was Kyle planning? What did he mean by get her money? I couldn't breathe as the pieces began to fall into place. Sarah hadn't just been taken advantage of. She had been manipulated, and it was much worse than I had ever imagined. I didn't know what to do with this new information. Should I confront Sarah again? Should I go straight to the police? Or was there something more sinister at play here? I couldn't decide, and the more I thought about it, the more the fear sank in. I had to know exactly what Kyle was planning. But how? How could I expose him without putting myself or Sarah in even more danger? I had to act, and I had to act fast. That afternoon, I called Carol. She was the one person I could trust to help me think this through without making rash decisions. We met at our usual coffee shop, and I wasted no time telling her everything I had found. The message from Kyle, my suspicions, the sinking feeling in my stomach that told me this wasn't just about money. "Lisa," Carol said, leaning in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "This doesn't sound good. If Kyle's planning something like this, it could be dangerous. You can't take this lightly. But you can't just go barging in there either. We need a plan. If you're going to confront him, you need to have all the facts. You need leverage." The words hit me hard. Leverage, that was it. I had to get something on Kyle, something that would force him to back off. But how? What could I use to turn the tables on him? We brainstormed for hours, but it wasn't until later that evening, when I was sitting at home with Sarah, that I finally came up with a plan. I told Sarah we needed to meet with Kyle again. She was hesitant, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't trust him anymore, and that made me feel a little better. But she was still too emotionally attached to the idea of a quick fix, a way out of her financial struggles. She still believed in the illusion that Kyle had painted for her. But I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore. If I was going to save my daughter, I had to get her to see the truth about him. I had to make her realize that he wasn't a savior, he was the enemy. The next day, I called Kyle. I didn't tell him that I knew what he was up to. I didn't let on that I had seen the message. I simply told him that I was ready to meet with him and discuss the investment one last time. His voice on the phone was calm, too calm. "Of course, Lisa," he said. "I'm glad you've come around. I'll be waiting." I felt a wave of nausea hit me as I hung up the phone. It was time. This was the moment where everything would change. That afternoon, I drove Sarah to the meeting, my mind spinning with every possibility. I was nervous, no, terrified, but I couldn't show it. I had to be strong for her. This wasn't just about saving my money. It was about saving Sarah from herself. When we arrived at the office, Kyle was already there, waiting behind his desk like the puppet master he thought he was. But I wasn't here to play by his rules anymore. "Good to see you again, Mrs. Reynolds," he said with that same too-smooth smile. I didn't smile back. "Let's cut to the chase, Kyle. I know what you're up to. I've seen the message, and I know everything. You've been using my daughter to manipulate me into giving you my pension, and I'm done playing your game." For a moment, his eyes flickered with something, anger maybe, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "You're mistaken, Lisa. I've only been trying to help Sarah. She's in deep, and this is the only way out." I shook my head. "No, Kyle, you've been using her, and you're not getting anything from me, not a single penny. You're going to back off, or I'll make sure everyone knows what you're really up to." His face tightened. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of me. You don't know who you're dealing with, Lisa. You think you can stop me? You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. I've already won. You're not going to control her anymore. And if you even try, I'll make sure the whole world knows what you've done. There was a long silence between us. Sarah was watching the exchange, her face pale, her hands shaking. I knew she had heard enough to finally see the truth, and that made everything worth it. Kyle's expression faltered for a second, and then he quickly composed himself. This isn't over, Lisa. You've made a mistake. I'll make sure you regret it. With that, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving Sarah and me standing there, alone. As we left the building, I glanced at Sarah. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief, but I could see the truth dawning on her. She wasn't the same person she had been just a few hours ago. Mom, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much I was being controlled. I was blinded by the idea of a quick fix. I never should have trusted him. I pulled her into a tight hug, my heart swelling with relief. You didn't know, Sarah, but you do now, and we're going to get through this together. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance to weather it, together. Would you have confronted Kyle like Lisa did? Or would you have tried a different approach? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to subscribe because the twists in this story aren't over yet. Trust me, what's coming next will leave you speechless. You don't want to miss it. The silence in the car was unbearable as Sarah and I drove back home after our confrontation with Kyle. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, and my mind kept replaying the scene in that office. Kyle's threat still echoed in my ears, his smug smile never fading as he walked away. But now it was more than just a business deal. It was personal. He had made it clear that he wasn't backing down, and neither was I. But there was something else in the back of my mind, a feeling that I couldn't shake. Something wasn't adding up. It wasn't just Kyle who had been manipulating Sarah. As I glanced over at her, I saw it. The same vulnerability, the same hesitance she had when she first told me about the business opportunity. I thought it was over. I thought I had saved her. But then, I remembered the words she had said in the office when she came to me after the confrontation. I didn't want you to know, Mom, but I was already in too deep. Kyle's not the only one I've been hiding things from. I had brushed off the comment, assuming she was talking about the money, the debt, the secrets she had kept. But was that really all? Was there more she hadn't told me? The guilt in her eyes during our meeting had haunted me all night. I needed to know the full truth. By the time we reached the house, I could feel the tension building between us. Sarah wasn't speaking to me, her gaze fixed on the window, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She was upset. I knew that, but what I didn't know was how much she was still hiding from me. And if I didn't confront it now, I was afraid I'd lose her forever. We parked the car in the driveway, and I turned off the engine, staring at the front door. The house felt colder than usual, as though the warmth we once shared had evaporated into thin air. I could hear Sarah's breath quicken beside me, but she remained silent. Sarah, I said, my voice softer than I intended. There's more, isn't there? Her head snapped toward me, and for a split second I saw a flash of panic in her eyes. But it was gone before I could register it. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. Sarah, I repeated, this time with more urgency, I need you to tell me the truth. Whatever it is, I need to know. She let out a long, shaky breath and turned her face to the side, staring out the window again. I could see the fight inside her. The battle between wanting to protect me from whatever she had gotten herself into and the undeniable pull of finally coming clean. She stopped herself, choking on her words. I never wanted you to find out like this. I didn't want you to be part of my mistakes. But there's more, Mom. I didn't just borrow money. I made a deal with Kyle. He asked for something more, and I did it. I could feel my heart stop in my chest. A deal. What had she done? What could possibly be more than borrowing money? What do you mean, Sarah? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. What did you do for him? She swallowed hard, her face pale. Her eyes darted toward me for just a moment, then she looked away again. I sold him the rights to my future inheritance, All of it. My share, everything. I promised him half when the time comes. My body went cold as I processed her words. Half of her inheritance, that was her future, her security, the one thing she could rely on after I was gone. How could she make that kind of deal? How could she let someone like Kyle take it from her? You did what? I could barely speak, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, that inheritance was supposed to help you. It was supposed to be for your future, for when I'm not around. How could you hand that over to someone like him? I didn't know what else to do. Her voice cracked, and I could hear the desperation in her tone. I thought it would solve everything. I thought if I could just pay him back, I could finally get out of this hole. But now I realize I was just digging deeper. Her admission hit me like a blow to the stomach. The air felt thick with the weight of her words. I had spent my entire life working, saving, and sacrificing for my children's future, and now it was all slipping through my fingers, through Sarah's fingers. And Kyle had been the one pulling the strings the entire time. Why didn't you come to me, Sarah? Why didn't you ask for help? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and confusion. I would have helped you. You know I would have. You didn't have to do this alone. I thought I could fix it on my own, she said, tears now streaming down her face. I didn't want you to look at me like a failure. I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle my life. But now I've lost everything. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how to make it right. I reached over and grabbed her hand, pulling it into mine. It's not too late, Sarah. We can fix this, together. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Kyle wasn't just going to walk away. He had something over Sarah now, something I couldn't undo. He had her tied to him in a way that I wasn't sure we could break free from. But there was still hope. I wasn't going to let Sarah destroy her future because of one mistake, and I wasn't going to let Kyle get away with what he had done to my daughter. As Sarah and I sat there in the car, the weight of everything began to settle over me. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, anger toward Kyle, toward myself, and even toward Sarah for making such a reckless decision. But I also felt something else, something more powerful, a sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let her drown in this. We were going to take him down, but it wasn't going to be easy. Kyle wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily, and I could already sense that he was planning his next move. But he had underestimated me, and most importantly, he had underestimated my daughter. The next morning, I called Mark. He had been the one who first warned me about Kyle, and I needed him now more than ever. He was a lawyer, and I needed legal advice. I needed to know how to protect Sarah, how to protect our future. Lisa, you've got to move quickly, Mark said when I explained the situation. Kyle is dangerous. If he has any kind of leverage over Sarah, he's going to use it. You need to make sure you get ahead of this before he does something worse. I hung up the phone with a heavy heart, knowing that the battle was only beginning. Kyle wasn't just a problem I could ignore anymore. He was a threat, and I had to make sure that I protected Sarah from him, no matter the cost. As Sarah sat in the living room, looking lost in thought, I knew that we had to act fast. I wasn't going to let her future be dictated by Kyle's lies. It was time to take control. But one thing was clear. I had just made an enemy, and this fight was far from over. It had been a week since the confrontation with Kyle, and despite every effort to protect Sarah, the knot in my stomach only grew tighter with each passing day. The weight of everything, Sarah's betrayal, Kyle's manipulation, was suffocating. I had spent so many nights lying awake, my mind racing with fear and anger. I had made a vow to myself that I wouldn't let this destroy our family. But how could I stop a man like Kyle? How could I protect Sarah from someone who had already gotten so far under her skin? I was at a crossroads. The more I learned about Kyle, the more I realized how deeply embedded he was in Sarah's life. The promises he made to her, the future he had painted, were nothing but lies. But Sarah didn't see it that way. She still believed in him, and that was the hardest part. No matter how many times I told her the truth, no matter how many times I begged her to see him for what he was, she still clung to the idea of a happy ending, a fairy tale that Kyle had sold her. I had to take matters into my own hands. If I wanted to save my daughter, I had to do something drastic. That morning, I received an unexpected call from Mark. He sounded serious, almost urgent. Lisa, you need to prepare yourself. I've been digging into Kyle's background, and there's something you need to know. You were right. He's more dangerous than you think. This isn't just about money. He's been involved in illegal activities, big ones. I don't know how deep this goes, but I've got a feeling he's using Sarah as a pawn in something much bigger. I felt the blood drain from my face as the gravity of Mark's words sank in. Illegal activities? How could I have missed this? My mind raced. What had I got myself into? What had Sarah gotten herself into? What do you mean, illegal activities? I asked, my voice trembling. Fraud, money laundering, possibly even blackmail, Mark replied grimly. Kyle been on the radar of some pretty serious people. And now, with Sarah involved, it's only a matter of time before he drags her down too. I felt a sickening wave of fear wash over me. I had known Kyle was bad news, but this was something else entirely. My daughter's life was on the line. I'm not letting him do this to her, I said, my voice shaking with determination. We have to do something, Mark. We have to stop him. Mark paused. I'm working on a plan, but it's going to take time. We need evidence, something solid. But in the meantime, I'm going to need your help. You can't just confront him. If you do, he'll use Sarah against you. You have to be smart about this. I nodded, though the pit in my stomach only deepened. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep playing by the rules. Sarah was too deep in this mess, and every day that went by, I feared it might be too late. Later that evening, I sat down with Sarah. She had been distant, barely speaking to me, avoiding my gaze whenever we were in the same room. I could feel the wall she had built between us growing taller with every passing day. It was breaking my heart, but I couldn't give up on her. Not now. Sarah, I said softly, we need to talk. I know you don't want to hear it, but I need you to listen to me. This man, Kyle, he's using you. He's not the person you think he is. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she crossed her arms defensively. Mom, stop. I'm not a little girl anymore. I can make my own decisions. I know you can, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But you're not seeing the truth. He's involved in things you don't understand. Dangerous things. He's using you to get what he wants, and I'm not going to sit back and let it happen. Sarah's face turned pale, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But then she quickly wiped it away, replacing it with anger. You don't get it, do you? I'm not some helpless little kid anymore, Mom. I made a mistake, but I don't need you to save me. Her words stung. She was right. She wasn't a little girl anymore. But it didn't stop me from wanting to protect her. It didn't stop me from fighting for her. You don't need me to save you, Sarah, I said quietly. But you do need to see the truth, and I'm not going to let you walk down this path any longer. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked over to the door. I couldn't stay in the same room with her any longer. The anger and the guilt and the fear were suffocating me. Just as I reached for the door, Sarah spoke again, her voice quieter this time. What are you going to do, Mom? What's your plan? I turned to face her, and for the first time in days, I saw a crack in the wall she had built around herself. The question hung in the air, unspoken. What was my plan? I don't know, I admitted, but I won't stop until you're safe, I promise you that. That night, I made my decision. I couldn't just sit around anymore. I had to take action. I had to go after Kyle and make sure he never hurt Sarah or anyone else again. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew it was risky, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to fight. The next day, I visited the police. Mark had warned me not to go in guns blazing, but I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for answers. I needed them to help me gather evidence to put Kyle behind bars. They took me seriously, but they also warned me that it wouldn't be easy. Kyle had connections. He knew how to cover his tracks. I didn't care. I was done being scared. I was done sitting in the shadows while Kyle continued to manipulate my daughter. It was time to make him face the consequences of his actions. The police assured me they would help, but they needed time. In the meantime, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called Sarah. We need to meet. I'm going to give you the chance to get out of this, Sarah. You can walk away, but I can't do it alone. You have to trust me. She didn't respond immediately, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice when she finally agreed to meet. Later that afternoon, I met her at the coffee shop. She looked different, vulnerable, scared even. Her walls were coming down and I could see the pain in her eyes. She didn't want to be in this mess anymore. She just didn't know how to escape. "I'm scared, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know how far I was in. I thought Kyle was the answer, but now I see what he's done to me. I reached across the table and took her hand. "We're going to fix this. You're not alone. We're going to take him down together." Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to make this right, but I'll do whatever it takes." And in that moment, I knew we were finally on the same page. It wasn't too late. We were going to take Kyle down, together. What would you do if you found out your child had made a dangerous deal like Sarah? Would you be able to trust them again, or would you fight to protect them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe. Share your thought if you want the continuation of this story.